Everybody knows the 1939 MGM grand hit The Wizard of Oz, starring Judy Garland, a film that changed movies forever. But today on Let's Talk About, we're going to actually talk about the sequel to Wizard of Oz. No, not that one. Yes, the 1985 46-year-old sequel, Return to Oz, on Real Sharks. Hey everyone, and welcome to this Let's Talk About with Return to Oz. And I am joined by my two co-hosts. The first one I'd like to introduce, some would call him the Black Tuna Fish, and that would be Steve.
Yo.
And the other man on the other side of the aisle, you know, some would say he was the original inspiration for Jason Waterfall, and that would be Maximus to the Lucas Maximus. Welcome.
Hey everybody, keep in mind, enjoy these moments before the Zack Snyder cut.
I like that.
For real, honestly, I was prepared to just like Wikipedia it and like bullshit my way through this, but like I actually watched the movie and I'm like, fuck, I can't get over this fucking movie. This is
right.
Yeah.
Let's get
I
started.
get what you mean, though. Let's go.
All right.
yeah.
Everyone knows the Wizard of Oz, the 1939 beloved classic starring Judy Garland. And it was an MGM grand hit. You know, world-renowned, beloved classic. You had Dorothy, the Tin Man, the Cowardly Lion, basically trying to stop the Wicked Witch of the West, trying to save the Emerald City. That is essentially what the Wizard of Oz was about. However, people seem to forget the 46-year-old sequel. Return to Oz essentially is about Dorothy. Basically, it's been weeks or months after the whole tornado.
6
and
months. 6 months specifically.
Aunt M thinks she's basically crazy. Everyone thinks she's crazy because she's talking about this mythical place that doesn't exist. So much so that they decide to take her into an asylum.
And to be more specifically, it's not a sequel to the movie. It is specifically a reference to like the book. So like the reference it's not a reference to the 1930s movies. It is explicitly a sequel.
Yes.
To the Wizard of Oz book. But yes, keep going because that shit. The next part like blows my mind that they even put this in a kids movie.
So they take Dorothy to essentially an insane asylum where they're gonna give her electroshock therapy.
Yeah.
And there is this big, huge storm. You know, trigger again from the original, and then all of a sudden she is greeted by Ozma, I believe that's her name, and she is taken basically to a river where they essentially almost drowned. And Dorothy is transported with a chicken, without her beloved dog Toto, I might add, to Oz.
Well, that was the best part about it because it's like she wakes up and like the chicken starts talking to her and she doesn't question it. She's just like, oh yes, I'm going to start talking to the chicken, like sight unseen. I'm like, okay,
which I have to say I didn't really care for. In the sense because I felt like it was pandering to like making the kids seem kind of stupid, making the audience feel a little stupid because there were scenes in which, you know, you take a beloved character like Toto out of the film and you replaced it with a chicken because the chicken did have relevance in the story. We're going to get to that more. But the chicken basically is there to like say, oh, what is that? The yellow brick road? And Dorothy is like, oh yeah, this is the road. Look, it's a brick. And it was like, you didn't need that.
Also, another thing is that like Dorothy just goes right into talking to him, but the chicken's name is Belina. They just go right into it, and I mean, and I get that Return to Oz is like the idea is we already know all this stuff, but like she goes right into it. Then like, oh yeah, everybody knows that the chicken talks, and I can talk to the chicken. That's just what we do. And I'm like, okay, well, that's not how a movie, you know, like we still got to have some rules here. We got to be okay with the chicken talking. But she's just like, yeah, of course the chicken talks.
So, and I thought I thought it was kind of making the audience, like, pandering to the audience, making the audience feel a little stupid, but that's me. But anyway, so back to the story. So essentially, Dorothy follows the Yellow Brick Road and discovers that the Emerald City is basically gone, and everyone is turned to stone. The Scarecrow became king, but the Cowardly Lion, the Tin Man, all the citizens of the Emerald City are now stone. And there is a wicked witch by the name of Mombi, who basically kind of rules the area, and
Yeah.
she's a woman with 46 heads that she could interchangeably by just popping off her head
Oh,
Just
and
pop
just,
off her head.
That shit-
going
Yeah.
by the moods.
And then, of course, she has a group of minions called the Wheelers, which are like so
Wheelers.
fucking creepy. Like, God,
Yes.
I
She also meets
I-
another character named TikTok, who is basically the Tin Man reincarnate, but a little bit slower.
yeah, TikTok. This is why I think a movie like what we need to return to Oz, because it's like we need to have TikTok now, because if anything, we got to strike while the iron is hot.
So she
And it's
basically
spelled the same way too. TikTok is spelled the same way. It's a coincidence.
Absolutely.
So
Keep going, Ralph.
so she essentially meets TikTok, and they devise a plan to. They find out that the Scarecrow has been kidnapped by the Mole King, who is played by Nicole Williamson, and basically he took all the emeralds from the Emerald City. He took the Scarecrow. He turned everyone to stone, and now he's in his castle in the Deadly Desert.
Yep.
And essentially, basically, Dorothy gets together with TikTok, and she also meets who me and Steve are convinced this is the embodiment of Jack Skellington, the Pumpkin King, because she meets
Jack Pumpkinhead.
Jack Pumpkinhead, who
Yeah.
essentially looks like Jack in
Yeah.
every conceivable way, by the
No,
way he talks and everything.
Tim Burton will probably deny it, but he absolutely built that character just off of
Right.
Jack Pumpkin.
That's what me and Steve were
That's
saying.
exactly what he is. Yeah,
And-
Yeah,
and, you know, it's funny,
definitely
too, because
a
there's-
long,
there is no
lanky.
Jack
Yeah,
Skellington. Like, no, yeah, he could.
Yeah, no,
he might deny it, but I'm not believing it.
it's too much of a
I
coincidence.
agree.
The character looks exactly like Jack Skellington, pretty
All right.
much.
And it's not the first montage either. We saw also in James and the Giant Peach when the centipede goes down to the pirate ship and he sees the pirate, he goes, "A Skellington?" Which is, I thought, another tap at Disney.
And so, of course, ultimately, like they win the day and all that.
They win the day. They create a moose chariot
Yes.
flying thing out of what is called essence of magic that they steal from Mombi, and they fly across the Deadly Desert to the Mole King's, his castle.
Yeah.
And the Mole King is, first of all, there's some really cool scenes with these rocks that basically are like his spies, and the rocks basically spy on Dorothy and report to the Mole King whatever's going on, which I thought was kind of gnarly.
Stop motion.
But anyway,
great.
yes.
Incredible.
But the Mole King, though, essentially, at first he's just like, "Yep, that's right. I did it. Everything's gone. Game over. I won." And then Dorothy starts crying, and then he decides to place his fate into a game with Dorothy, in which he tells their whole group, which is TikTok, Jack Pumpkinhead, the chariot thing. I don't even know what his name was, but they decide to go in a room and try to touch whatever all the ornaments that he has,
Yes,
and essentially.
So basically, so the Gnome King turned the Scarecrow into an ornament. They have to find.
Yes, and they have to find the Scarecrow.
So,
And long story short, Dorothy, through some trickery of TikTok, discover the Scarecrow, and they start to free most of the residents and people of Oz. And then the Gnome King goes ballistic and turns into this volcano monster, in which he starts to try. He confronts the group, and he starts to eat Jack Pumpkinhead, who has Bella the chicken in his head at the time, which she finally, throughout the whole movie, has been complaining about not dropping an egg, and finally drops an egg into the Gnome King's mouth, in which there is this scary, dark part of it, like, poison, poison. And he's like, "Did you know that eggs are poisonous to gnomes?" And the Gnome King dies. Dorothy is essentially whisked back to the kingdom of the Emerald City, in which Ozma becomes basically the Queen of Oz. She's basically the granddaughter of Oz, and Dorothy gets sent back home. And they check on Dorothy every once in a while, but as Dorothy comes home, she's actually found at the shore of a river because, she was drowning in the river at the time. And then Aunt Em and the father essentially don't give Dorothy any more trouble after that. End of movie. In a nutshell. This film, I'm very, very, very conflicted on because I think this is a really good example of, and as you were saying too, Luke, of a book. Now, it's like an example I would say from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, which is more based off the book, which is not very well received, and then Willy Wonka in the Chocolate Factory, which with Gene Wilder, which everybody loves, but that one is not based off the book at all.
Yeah.
This is essentially the same thing.
Yeah. In this case, it's like I would say that like the thing about Return to Oz is that there is just so much that is so wild and crazy that this is stuff like this is stuff that like wouldn't be made now, and it's like not all of it works, but it's like God, I'm so glad stuff like this exists. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. And of course, if you know about the books of Oz, like Oz is a very weird book series. It is like the 1930 movie was just kind of like very, straightforward with musicals, but like with Oz, it's like Oz is such a weird book. It's like straight weird and also kind of a little bit lesbianic actually, if you but
if you're into that sort of thing.
So it's the problem is that like what's it? I'm gonna quote the Wikipedia article that I was going to just rely on, but it's like this movie did not do well because it was too dark for material. And the thing is that like I think that I kind of
it's a translation. I think lost in translation.
I actually think it's kind of
dark.
Worse. I think that like they tried to like they shouldn't have made it a kids movie. I think that if they'd done it like as a young adult movie, more like for teens and adults, I think it would have been much more. But like the story itself is pretty simple. Like it's trying to be a kids movie.
Yes.
But it's not a good kids movie at all.
No,
but
it came out during the time of Labyrinth, Willow,
exactly,
Legend, the
like,
Never-Ending Story.
It should have. It should have been that. It should have been something like Never-Ending Story or Labyrinth or Dark Crystal. It should have been a little bit more mature. Like it should have explicitly tried to be more mature, but it wasn't.
I think this is where like the movie for me. I think I'm with Rob on this, where I'm a little conflicted because I didn't hate the film. And obviously, it has a lot of problems of why it's so, obscure even today. But as a kids' film, I kind of feel like it fit. It's right smack dab in the '80s, and you had so many other sci-fi films that came out, like Weird Science,
and action adventure films.
Action adventure films like Back to the Future and The Goonies and all these other ones.
Conan came out the same time as this movie.
Yeah.
Right. And there were so many like better movies, quote unquote, at that time. But this movie was the product of what the times were reflecting. Unfortunately, you're a sequel to a movie that came out in the 50s. And now you're in the and now you're in the 80s, and it's a completely different genre of what a kid's film is, how kids perceive things. Like I said, Legend had came out. You know what I mean? Like Never Ending Story. Which
from what I understand about Return to Oz is that like when they made the movie, it was like a couple years out from when Wizard of Oz had officially hit the public domain, so they could basically do whatever they wanted with that series. And this is a Disney movie, by the way.
Yes, it is a Disney movie.
And it's funny, it's because like I see stuff with this. And I have to like make the connection to the Tim Burton Alice in Wonderland because it has that same kind of like it wants to like be a little bit more. It wants to be a kid movie, but it's a little bit more mature and a little bit darker and weirder. I would say between the two, like Return to Oz is much more like sticking to its guns, weird.
Yes. Yes.
And I think, and what's funny is that of course Alice in Wonderland did really, really well when it came out. So it's just like it's one of those things where it's like if Return of Oz came out at any other time, if it came out in the 90s, if it came out in the 2000s, if it came out now, it would fucking just explode in popularity. But right now, it's like, it's kind of, it's mostly just a cult hit.
It's the stepchild between, it's sandwiched between Dark Crystal and the Labyrinth. It's like Disney's, neglected stepchild.
Exactly. And it's like,
the stepchild of the stepchild, pretty much.
Yeah, exactly.
Because even those films are stepchild.
Alice in Wonderland is doing the exact same stuff that Return to Oz is doing right now, and everybody, and regardless of people's opinions, Alice in Wonderland did very successfully. And so it's just like, I was telling Rob, it's the opposite of lightning in a bottle in that, like, this really weird creative energy. If it had, it was literally put at the wrong place at the wrong time. This movie. So
most definitely. I think it was, again, going back to what I was saying, is like you're taking a film that you're trying to make a sequel to that was viewed as one of the greatest films in cinema history with The Wizard of Oz. You're doing
one of the greatest films.
Yeah, right. And then like Rob has said, like some odd years later, you're doing it in the 80s, a completely different genre, right smack dab in the 80s, where now they're getting ready to do stuff with more puppeteering, and then now there's a child actor who's involved who's going to be the lead. No offense to her, but like he was still like
the Return to Oz child actor Dorothy. What's the actress's name again? Fairuza Balk.
Yeah, Fairuza Balk.
Most people know, like, she was the girl in The Craft. She was
Waterboy. She's had a good, successful career for a while in the 90s.
In this movie, like, she is terrifying. Like, she is famous for kind of having these, like, very pale blue eyes and this just, like very distinct, haunting stare. And as a little kid, she has that as well. The first shot in this movie is like we pan over the window and zoom in on Dorothy, and she just, like, with her, like, sleepless, gaunt eyes glares at the audience. And I'm like, what the fuck? Like, I was like, my fight or flight instincts immediately kicked in. I'm like, Jesus, this kid is going to kill me. She has, like, she has the face of a ghost child throughout this entire film. It's terrifying.
One of the things, too, that I think the reason it did not do very well is if you look at specifically the time in which this movie came out, 1985, we have done a special on this that had a real correlation to this event in the history of Disney, because The Black Cauldron also came out in 1985. And what also happened in 1985? Don Bluth left Disney. Yep. And there was a lot of focus on Don Bluth's work. And, Don Bluth was killing Disney in the ratings, in the box office. So this was essentially almost a forgotten failure. Bad time, bad place. Definitely a bad place in Disney's era. It was the Disney, as they call the Disney Dark Ages.
And again, it's like, it's failed, yeah. Like, it failed. A failed movie is something that didn't achieve its goal at the time. But in 2021, like Luke and you have said, Rob, like, this aesthetic, this theme is bred for cult, like, film culture. Like, this film has been done now in the Alice in Wonderland, and it's been done successfully. They try to do that, what we were saying, in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory in the 2005 re-remake.
Charlie Factory, yeah.
With Johnny Depp.
They were doing these dark that movie. The difference with that is that movie is clearly, like, sanitized and, like, was pushed through a committee.
Oh yeah.
The difference is that, like, Return to Oz, this feels like the director, like, had to fight everybody at every turn. Like, it's just like, this is a movie that, like, was made against what's the word? This movie was made in secret. Like the producers did not approve of all the crazy shit that went on. You know what I mean?
Let me stop you right there because that's an interesting point to make. Because the director who made this film, and he also wrote it, is Walter Murch. This is the only film he's ever done. Only film he's ever directed. He has been a producer forever.
I think exactly. I think he, basically Return of Oz in the movie he got away with. It's like he.
But here's the other interesting point. The other writer who wrote with him was Gil Dennis. Gil Dennis. This was also his first movie he ever wrote, and the last movie he ever wrote was Walk the Line. This was kind of like their first stab at a film, which I think is always an interesting pattern in cult classics. Usually it's a lot of first-time directors, because usually, we all get the idea of when you're making a movie, you got to throw everything you can into it because this might be your only shot. And that's quote from Kevin Smith. Throw everything you can in the first movie because you don't know if you're going to make another one. But
right.
I think Return to Oz is very interesting. And, it is even kind of shunned by Disney in itself, because for the longest time it was the Guinness Book of World Records longest sequel. So basically 46 years before they ever made a sequel to the original film. Guess what beat that out? Bambi 2. Disney let this movie be lapsed in time in a record by a B-rated direct-to-shelf movie, Bambi 2.
It came out years later.
Years later.
Gosh, man, that's very weird.
Some of the more interesting things, too, about the film, the guy who actually played TikTok had to sit in it upside down and basically use his arms to move the legs because it was really hard to work the machine. Franz and Bulk did most of the film barefoot, which is another thing. But also, too, the ruby slippers were hardly in the movie, if anyone didn't notice.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, like, that was the point of the whole, like, at the end.
Yes. Drew Barrymore actually went out for the original role of Dorothy, as well as Alanis Morissette, Elizabeth Berkley, and Juliette Lewis. And Fairuza Balk got the role out of all of them. They did try to redo this again with Oz, the powerful. The great and powerful. So they essentially did try to make the move. To make the move, but that one was also it wasn't well received. So I think it is on a level too that you were saying of the translation from the books, because Oz is very, very, very weird. It's a weird series of books, and I think essentially the 1939 one was such a classic because it is in the style of that time period where it's more about the storytelling, not about essentially the look and the feel of the movie like it is later on in films, where the film itself is supposed to take you into another world. And I really think that it just has gotten lost in translation. And so everyone is so stuck on that original one. Anything else that translate from the books or any ideas just gets lost on people. Kind of like Alice in Wonderland. Some people don't like the Alice in Wonderland movies.
It's true. That's true. And, but the question I pose to both of you guys is, like I said, we are talking about this in 2021. This came out in 1985. There's a lot of films that people go back to in that era of 1985, and they pay homage to. They love it. They don't want it to be touched, but they don't really mention this. And why isn't this talked about within the cult classics in that type of genre? Is it something that we're not seeing? Because again, by all accounts, this is not a terrible film. I want to reiterate this. This is something that you can watch, and you can be like, it wasn't good.
I highly recommend this movie, even if it's
people to go see this. So why isn't this on that type of scale for people? Like, why is it still the redheaded stepchild? It's on Disney Plus, so there's no excuse for people not to see it. It's there. It's just it's hiding in plain sight. People just don't know it.
And that's why we're doing this. Let's talk about Return to Oz.
I genuinely think Return to Oz belongs up in the strata of like Labyrinth, Dark Crystal, like Labyrinth.
I kind of agree with you there, Luke. There's some flaws to it, but overall, it's nothing different than the other ones.
Yeah,
It's
I would
just
say
Right.
as dark.
for me, the big thing is just that like it's a kid's story. Like it's very
Right.
simple, it's very and it's also but like, if you had a little bit more of a serious, more mature story, I think like the visuals and all of the things would really complement it well. Because again,
It got nominated for
at,
Best Visuals.
exactly at one point, like again, the evil queen like has 34 separate living heads. She just like clunks on her head. It's a terror. And then at one point, she gets like chased down by a headless version of the queen with all of the heads screaming at her. Yeah, it's fucking terrifying. It's so good though. It's
Right.
so good. And then of course, I would say Jack Pumpkinhead. He's so fun to watch.
The
Lastly,
real life version of Jack
here's
Skellington.
another thing that I don't know if you guys noticed, but okay, so the Gnome King, he opens up a cave for them to go through, and a bunch of hands like spread it open. Did anybody think about Goatsy when they saw that?
No, I
Like,
didn't.
I
That's
thought
funny,
about Goatsy so like it's just like, oh, this is a bunch of hands spreading open an asshole. And I'm like, oh, and of course this is for children. Of course this is for somebody.
The only thing I can think of in this film is I still always think of that goddamn Family Guy joke of when he's sitting in there of Cowards Anonymous, and he's with the Cowardly Lion, and he's like, and I come from a world where there's monkeys and they fly. And he's like, what? Oh my God, that's terrible. And he's like, really? And he's like, yeah, of course I would be scared. And he's like, he goes back, punches Dorothy in the face. He's like, I'm called the Rational Lion now. Don't forget it. And I just think though, I mean, I have to agree with Luke though. I like the film. It's a hidden gem. It really is. And it's a film that's, I mean, one, I could see why Fruza Volk, got more roles in her life because she did an excellent job. I know she seems like a ghost child that wants to eat your soul, Luke, but she did an amazing job.
No, she's great at it. So
She was
is
good.
terrifying though. It's
But some of the
This
things
kind
I
of
wanted to,
started her career in that kind of like being
Yeah.
the
no, this was the
like,
first movie she
weird,
was in.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is like it kind of gave her start. That was her aesthetic after that in the '90s was just being that weird kind of gothy girl.
well, she was also in, she did The Craft, which was another movie that kind of was, not much of a jump from that to that. I
Yeah,
just think I liked it though, and I would honestly give Oz, and we're gonna give a rating on it on this Let's Talk About, since all three of us are here. I would honestly give Oz an 8. I would. I would give it an 8. I think it's a good
out of 10.
out of 10. 8 out of 10. I give it an 8 out of 10.
I hear you on that. I'd probably give it a strong like 7.5, just because of people who are unsure to go see it. Go see it. This is something that you should see. If you've seen the first one, you should see this one. Like just because even if you don't like it, the aesthetics and just the presentation alone of how it is and how crazy it is, really, just for being a kids film, just watch it. It's not bad.
I will also give it 7 ghost children out of 10.
7 ghost children out of 10. So I guess we're at a 7.5 as a whole for the whole Real Sharks crew, giving it Return of Oz a 7.5. But overall, though, the reason I give it an 8 is just because I feel like it's a hidden gem. I feel like everyone has essentially forgot about this movie, even Disney. Even Disney is like, we don't really want to talk about this film.
Absolutely. I think
And
what? Let's do it. Let's make it our passion project. I mentioned to you, Rob, that there have been rumblings in the movie biz that Disney is going to try to like reboot the Oz like as its own sort of like fantasy
I'm glad
series.
you brought that up.
Again, the
With the
Oz
Watchmen
series
director.
is a lot of crazy cool shit going on, and it's like if I could get one movie that's just like Return to Oz, or at least as weird and crazy, money well spent. So Let's make it happen. Let's make it happen. Let's get people on board because it's on Disney Plus. Everybody has Disney Plus.
Go watch Return of Oz.
It's on Disney Plus. Get finish Mandalorian, finish WandaVision, then watch Return to Oz.
And it's interesting that we're doing this piece, and it was this is strictly coincidence. Coincidence? Yeah, actually.
Coincidence?
Yeah.
Coincidence.
Basically, we found out too, it was announced on February 9th, the Wizard of Oz remake is planned with the Watchmen director from the series The Watchmen.
Wait, Zack Snyder?
No, not Zack Snyder. Nicole Castle, the visual architect for The Watchmen. Yeah. So he's thinking about taking up the project.
Oh yeah, that was another bit. I was like, I wanted to say I really like this episode today. I love this dialogue before the Zack Snyder cut gets released, and that's all everybody talks about for the next year because that's what's going to happen. Every podcast, every video series, all we're going to talk about is the Zack Snyder cut.
Not Real Sharks. Real Sharks. We like to go around all that,
Yeah,
exactly,
dude, we go the long way around.
Other Farula Balks movies to go through.
Right. All right. So this is going to be this Real Sharks edition of Let's Talk About. Remember to listen, like, and subscribe, and hit that notifications for more episodes from Real Sharks. And we'll catch you on the flip side.